Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack something really fascinating, the actual definition of the word entrepreneur. Because, if you ask 100 different people today what an entrepreneur is, you'll probably get 100 completely different answers. But how did we actually arrive at our modern understanding? Well, to figure that out, we have to trace how this definition has evolved over more than 250 years. It's this incredibly dynamic story of brilliant minds building upon and, honestly, often aggressively challenging the ideas of the folks who came before them.
So, I want to pose this direct question to you right out of the gate. What actually makes an entrepreneur? Is it simply the act of taking financial risks? Or is there, I don't know, a more elusive, specific skill set involved? That is the core puzzle we're solving today. We're going to dig into the true historical roots of this concept and see how early economists literally violently disagreed with one another on what the actual DNA of an entrepreneur looks like.
Section 1. The Evolution of Theories. Let's get right into it.
You see, the concept of entrepreneurship isn't just some static definition you find in a dictionary. It's a developing, centuries-long academic conversation where each new era actively reshapes the conclusions of the last. Just look at these early classical theories. Notice how rapidly these ideas started compounding and reacting to one another in the 18th and 19th centuries. In the 1750s, we get the risk-bearing theory, the idea that it's all about stomaching financial uncertainty. But literally the very next decade, in the 1760s, the Coordinator Theory emerges as a direct reaction. It argued that, hey, passive risk-taking simply couldn't explain how a business actually operates. Fast forward a bit to the 1840s, and the conversation shifts again to the great man theory, focusing instead on innate, exceptional personality traits. By the 1860s, the lens moves strictly to profit maximization. You can really see how each generation isn't just pulling ideas out of thin air. They're looking at the previous framework and saying, wait a minute, you missed a critical piece of the puzzle. Let's move to and see how this builds as we enter the 20th century. Look at how much wider the lens gets here. In the 1900s, Max Weber introduces the Protestant ethic, injecting sociology and culture straight into the economic conversation. Then, in the 1920s, Frank Knight deeply refines that old 1750s risk framework by separating calculable risk from true, unquantifiable uncertainty. It's a direct evolutionary response to those early classical debates. By the 1940s, Schumpeter drops his massive theory of creative destruction, the idea that the entrepreneur's true job is to smash old markets to create brand new ones. And jumping right into the 2000s, we see the utility theory, focusing on the broader personal motivations behind starting a venture. All of these modern ideas are tethered directly back to the relationships and conflicts forged in those early classical debates.
Section 2. More than risk bearers. To really grasp the foundation of all these modern theories, we need to zoom in on a pivotal turning point back in the 1700s. This was the moment where the theory took a massive leap forward and essentially created the blueprint for how we view business operations today. So, picture the economic landscape in the 1750s. At this time, the predominant thought, heavily influenced by thinkers like Richard Cantillon, was incredibly straightforward. An entrepreneur was defined merely as a risk bearer or a capitalist. And that was it. The entire identity was completely tied to the wallet. If you were the one putting your capital on the line, stepping into the unknown to buy goods at a certain price and sell them at an uncertain price, boom, you were the entrepreneur. It was seen as purely a financial function.
But then we hit this beautiful contrast. The 1750s risk-bearer view clashes directly with the 1760s coordinator view. The 1760s framework didn't just add a polite little footnote, it actively challenged the previous decade. It essentially argued, look, anybody with inherited money can take a financial risk. Stomaching risk is passive. So what is the active job of the entrepreneur? This was a total paradigm shift in the academic relationship between capital and human agency. It directly answered the glaring shortcomings of the earlier theory.
Section 3. The Great Economic Coordinator. The brilliant mind behind that 1760s pivot was French economist Jean-Baptiste Say. Say stepped into the arena and introduced a revolutionary idea that permanently altered the entrepreneurial landscape by dubbing the entrepreneur the Great Economic Coordinator. He stated the entrepreneur is the vital link who possesses the rare judgment necessary to combine raw materials, human efforts, and financial capital. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that specific word, judgment. Say completely separated the act of funding a business from the act of actually running it. Without this specific coordinating agent, this human brain acting as the vital link, all the money, all the people, and all the raw materials in the world just remain completely inert.
Think about how profoundly true this concept is. Factors of production do not organize themselves. A pile of bricks, a stack of cash, and 10 eager workers will never, ever spontaneously generate a profitable business. They will literally sit there until the end of time. Say argued enthusiastically that the entrepreneur's true job is stepping into that void, shifting resources out of areas of low productivity and forcing them to align into something valuable. It's an active, highly aggressive process of organization.
Actually, scratch that. A really great way to visualize Say's theory is to just gamify it. Imagine you're playing an old-school video game. Let's call it arcade mode. Your objective as the entrepreneur isn't just to throw money at the screen and hope for the best. No, you have to move this glowing reticle around the board, frantically ramming into specific economic inputs to collect them. First, you have to allocate land, so your raw materials. Second, allocate labor, your human effort. And third, allocate capital. And you're doing all of this while frantically dodging decoy shapes and bad investments before the timer runs out. That frantic, calculated maneuvering, that is exactly the rare judgment Jean-Baptiste Say was talking about.
Section 4. Launching production successfully.
Okay, so we have our inputs, but how do we actually move from this frantic coordination phase into a functioning reality? Well, Say believed that to launch successfully, you couldn't just haphazardly throw these three elements together. They had to be in perfect harmony. In a perfectly balanced venture, we have equal allocations representing land, labor, and capital. The entrepreneur's true mastery is recognizing exactly what proportions of each are required for their specific venture. If you bring them into this kind of perfect balance, you unlock high productivity. It's like a giant puzzle coming together. But what happens when that judgment fails? Imagine a scenario with massively over-allocated capital sitting right next to completely starved labor. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact danger Say was warning us about. You might have raised millions of dollars, tons of capital, but if you haven't hired the human effort required to actually execute the vision, that money is entirely useless. The venture target is completely mismatched. Which brings us to the harsh reality of Say's framework. Over-allocating capital while starved for labor leads directly to structural inefficiency and, ultimately, collapse. The stakes here are absolute. Jean-Baptiste Say wasn't just describing a neat trick for making more money. He was defining the literal physics of the economy. Failing to act as a proper coordinator doesn't just mean slightly lower margins, it leads to the total economic collapse of the venture. No way around it. So the crucial point is summarized perfectly in Say's core assertion. The entrepreneur is a coordinator, the vital link who possesses the rare judgment necessary. This was his foundational contribution to modern business thought, and it permanently redefined the academic conversation moving forward. Every single theory that came after it, from Schumpeter's creative destruction to modern utility theories, they all had to grapple with this reality and establish a relationship with Say's work. They basically all accepted that an entrepreneur is, at their very core, an active agent of coordination. Which leaves us with this final thought for you to consider. We've seen how the definition evolved, right? From mere risk bearers to master coordinators, and later into agents of creative destruction. But what about you? Looking at your own experiences, which of these classical theories best describes your own view of modern business? Are we just placing bets on the future, or are we actively forcing the future into existence through rare judgment and coordination? Keep that question in mind the next time you look at a successful startup, and see if you can spot the invisible hand of the coordinator at work. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.